Frank Dux saying he could basically destroy Chuck Norris? That is absurd. Well, I already know what the peanut gallery is gonna say.
Hey, didn't you say Frank Dux would beat Michael Bisping so fast he'd break a new Kumite record?
Like, do you think the fight would even last 1 minute?
No.
Not even close. In fact, you probably break a new Kumite record. I mean, no offense, but Michael Bisping is no Chuck Norris. By the way, Michael Bisping did catch wind of that video and he said, I don't know who the bigger joke is, Viking Samurai or Frank Dux. That whole thing was actually part of something much bigger. It would have been crazy, and someday I'll actually tell you more. There was a lot more to that story. But anyway, man, don't take everything so damn serious. I mean, I am wearing a t-shirt of myself, right? Hey, one of you guys sent this to me, and thank you, by the way. I feel like I have to comment, because apparently Frank Dux said he could basically destroy Chuck Norris. I mean, Chuck Norris could pretty much single-handedly defeat the Marvel Cinematic Universe if he wanted to. Luckily, he's a nice guy, and he's a peaceful man, so good for Marvel. But let's see if this thing actually makes sense with what Frank said. This is on the real Frank Dux Facebook page. Let's see what he says here. Oh, by the way, this was all based off of a post where Frank said, the offensive mindset. What is it really? And I'll just read you a little bit of that post. He basically said, not everyone can be a warrior. Sorry. Being a macho movie star, self-made billionaire, $1 million+ event pugilist athlete, or lineage supreme Soki professor grandmaster martial artist, I think I know who he's talking about with that reference, doesn't skip you to the front of the line. You are not a warrior. That's all in caps, by the way. So he's serious when he says that. So anyway, you guys could read that whole post. He posted October 30th. And someone actually posted this funny meme. Facebook took down a Chuck Norris post, so Chuck Norris took down Facebook. Then Frank Dux made Chuck put it back. Yeah, there really should be more Frank Dux memes out there, man. I really think we're not taking advantage of the internet. But anyway, somebody in the comments had asked him, he said, one-on-one in the UFC cage, Prime Dux versus Prime Chuck. Who wins? How fast? Frank Dux himself actually replied.
Oh, geez, Frank, I hope you know what you're doing.
He said, Chuck Norris in his prime was devastating, but not well-rounded cross-trained fighter as I was. My starting out in my training jiu-jitsu with Jack Seki, who is trained by Jigoro Kona, the founder of Judo himself, provides me with a decisive advantage. So that part actually I don't doubt. I've heard that from multiple sources that Frank Dux actually did train with Jack Seki. I think it might have been at Valley College. I forget where exactly, but now I don't know how long he trained with Jack Seki. I don't know how far up he moved. I don't know how skilled he got at it, but he did at one point train with Jack Seki. That part's actually true. And then he says, FYI, original authentic judo matches contain punching and kicking like in MMA. I also tower over and outweigh Chuck, who is, 5'6" in lifts, and myself at 6'4" and solid 225 pounds. I'm pretty damn sure Chuck Norris is more than 5'6", especially if he were to wear lifts. I think minimum he's probably 5'8", more likely 5'10". So if Chuck was in lifts, Chuck would be 6 foot. So that argument doesn't really make sense. And again, that goes with the whole size argument. Like, yes, size plays a huge role in a fight, obviously. But it's just like when somebody says, oh, they could beat Bruce Lee because they're bigger than him.
First of all, I would Bruce Lee up.
Wait a
Nah, I don't think so, man. Not Bruce Lee. Anyway, Frank says, I'm 6'4", solid 225. So Frank probably is 6'4". He's a bigger guy. 225, I don't doubt he weighs that. Is it solid? And it really depends on how somebody defines solid, right? Like, I don't necessarily think he had like a ripped six-pack. And then he says, I was the hardest hitting fighter in my day to where 13 years out of retirement, I generated enough force to punch through bulletproof glass and shatter 2 champagne bottles with a single kick at varying heights, etc. Available for viewing on YouTube. So yes, that footage is out there. You guys can actually watch that footage. He does punch through this bulletproof glass. The question and controversy is it really bulletproof? So I wasn't there. I didn't organize the event. I've been told certain things that I'm not going to get into. Regardless, the strike is clean, the strike is fast, the strike is hard. Is it really bulletproof glass? I'm not going to comment on that. As far as like the champagne bottles, the way they explode is questionable, and people point that out, but I will give them credit. Like, those are pretty fast kicks, and they are varying heights. Are they real champagne bottles? Again, I wasn't there. I don't know. Oh, and then he says, I was a threat to Stephen Hayes, Bruce Lee, Joe Louis, and Chuck Norris special interest groups that the martial arts media was dependent on for content. Well, why didn't they just cover more Frank Dux? I mean, he was in that Black Belt magazine talking about the Kumite and Bloodsport. Like, why couldn't he be part of the Stephen Hayes, the Chuck Norris, the Bruce Lee, the Joe Louis group? Why not more articles on Frank? And then he says, so because of the external interference and pressure by them, I was professionally pigeonholed. Oh, that's interesting. So is Frank actually blaming Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris? I'm pretty sure I heard him blame Stephen Hayes and his ties to Black Belt and like the argument, who's the real ninja, right? Speaking of which, Stephen Hayes is freaking awesome, and I'm going to put out some interviews that I did with him recently pretty soon. Really nice guy. Doesn't want to badmouth anybody. He's all about positivity, which is a good thing. I respect that. And then he says, likewise, fake news was paid for and generated about me by them after some of the same media conglomerates published. They verified all of my accomplishments and claims. Okay, so that sentence is a little wonky, but basically, Frank is saying Black Belt and everybody, like, they verified his claims, and then fake news was paid for to make him look bad. Like, the question is why? And then he says, people for many years spin untruth and injurious stories, injurious, that's a hard word to say.
Injurious
stories about me in venues I am not entitled to respond. Well, that was actually kind of funny where back in the day, you know, he had said I lacked ethics because I had, you know, people on the channel that talked about him.
Frank's claims are ridiculous. I see David trying to give him as much leeway as he possibly can that maybe some of this stuff is true. It could possibly be true, but
I don't believe it.
Not because it doesn't make logical sense. But Frank's lies are this kind. I flapped my wings so hard, my hands, that I levitated up and I landed on the moon.
And then I finally got Frank on. And I thought that was quite fair, and we had some pretty interesting videos that opened actually a lot of people's minds the way he would explain things. The number of people in the tournament will have to had almost be infinity. So every time you want to add a round to a bracket, you have to double the number of competitors. So some guy on YouTube and on the internet did the math and said there would literally have to be like 74 quadrillion people. And I'm more than happy to get him back on, by the way, if he wants to address certain things. Now, I think it would be beneficial and interesting for everybody if he would actually debate one of these guys. So we'll see what happens, but man, that would be an amazing debate. And then what else did he say? And where there are rare exceptions to this one-sided selective fact-finding, I am limited by what I can say. See, I don't know if he's trying to take a shot at me or what, but he can come back on. I mean, I know you guys like to watch him, right? And we could address stuff. Let me know. Comment below. He also says, this observable truth is why in their minds I'm the best there ever was to this day! Exclamation point. Logically, otherwise this crap would stop and I'd be allowed to compete fairly.
Double exclamation point.
Even MMA mouthpiece Joe Rogan now and again takes pot cowardly shots at me, never allowing me to respond. I think Frank Dux should be on Joe Rogan's podcast. That would be something. I think that would be fair. I think that would be more than fair. And I think Frank would be a lot more interesting than a lot of the guests that Joe Rogan has on.
It is the truth.
Now, Joe Rogan in general I do like, but I have mixed feelings with a lot of the stuff he says. So, for example, talking about like other martial artists, he'll question like Van Damme. He'll say, oh, he's got flippy kicks, there's no power. It's like, what are you talking about, man?
The problem with the way he kicks, he's like got like point kicks, like flippy.
Yeah.
They're like flippy kicks. I don't think he has any power.
You're talking about like some of the certain kicks that you've seen that he does, that he's just messing around for fun. But you're discounting everything else out there, including the story when he kicked that Navy SEAL across the room. Funny enough, that ex-Navy SEAL was actually the guy that wrote Hard Target.
Now, when I first met Jean-Claude, he was giving some karate lessons at some gym on Beverly Boulevard. And I had met Chuck Farr before then. And Chuck was a Navy SEAL. So I introduced Chuck to Jean-Claude. We're in a gym and Chuck says, hey, Jean-Claude, so let me see what one of your kicks feels like. And go ahead and just give me a kick right in the chest as hard as you can. And now he's got 4 pads in front of his chest. Jean-Claude basically gives him one of those Van Damme kicks. Chuck goes flying across the room. We're in a gym, we're in a good-sized room. He goes flying across the room, barely staying on his feet. Jean-Claude gave him a serious kick with 4 pads. And afterwards, Chuck said, wow, I really felt that.
But Joe Rogan either doesn't know about that story or just goes by some of the footage that he's seen. It's like that logic makes no sense. For example, I've been bench pressing since 1994 consistently, like minimum once or twice a week for 27 years. Yet there's not like a video of me bench pressing. So it's like saying, oh, well, that guy never bench pressed in his life. It's like, what are you talking about? Just because there's not a video of it? Like, the logic makes no sense. So maybe because like Van Damme doesn't have that video of him kicking Chuck Farrer across the room or like some other really hard kicks, it's like, it doesn't mean he can't kick hard. So Joe Rogan is like, I don't know, man. It's like he'll take like a piece of something that he sees and just like base his whole argument on that. Oh, see, he can't kick hard.
I don't think he has any power.
Based on like some selective footage that he's seen. It's just a very limited and way to think, and quite disappointing from Joe Rogan, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, Frank also says, am I not newsworthy to be on his show when I have a film based on the true events of my life and brought more people to study the arts than anyone else? We got to give a lot of credit to a lot of guys in Bloodsport. Of course, Frank gets credit. Of course, producer Mark Cassell gets credit. Sheldon Lettich gets credit for bringing those guys together, actually writing the screenplay. Jean-Claude Van Damme gets credit for inspiring, for portraying that character and having that beautiful, graceful karate that he kicks hard in. Trust me, look at him kicking the tree in Kickboxer, for example. The score by Paul Herzog motivated a lot of people. The cinematography by David Worth. Like, you gotta give a lot of these people credit. But yes, Frank Dux also obviously gets credit for Bloodsport. But that movie as a whole, and all these people and more that were involved, that's what inspired so many people, whether it was true or not. Like, that is just a beautiful mastercraft in filmmaking in so many ways. And yeah, give credit to Cannon Films and Menachem Golan even. I mean, let's give credit all around, guys. And then he says, yes, all while my story is newsworthy, I shall continue to be pigeonholed and censored by special interest groups to protect the illusion that exists today. I mean, what kind of special interest groups, man? Like, it's not like he's running for office, right? It's not like he's a politician. Yeah, anyway, man. But regardless, like, what do you guys think about the whole Chuck Norris doesn't stand a chance, basically because he's smaller and then he's not as well-rounded a fighter, which, now that I think about it, I actually do have to disagree with. Obviously, Chuck is smaller than Frank, but he's pretty damn well-rounded. I mean, Chuck was training with the Machado brothers. He was training jiu-jitsu back in the day before it ever got popular, so he was working on his ground game. I mean, Chuck is a beast, man. Obviously, he's got the kicks. The one thing that Frank Dux and Chuck Norris have in common, though, they both trained with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, how cool is that? You could see some old school footage from a German TV show with Chuck and Van Damme. And then as far as like Frank and Van Damme, watch this video here, linked in the description below, where basically Frank Dux talks about training Van Damme for Bloodsport. Click that video right there.